Dear participants, I'm Kim Jung-gyu, the professor and the president of the Keimyung Institute for International Studies. I'd like to welcome you to KF Korea Workshop. KF Korea Workshop helps foreign residents in Korea to understand the culture, history, and society of Korea in a systematic way and experience various aspects of Korea by providing various programs. This program was launched in 2015 and has been conducted in 2021. This year, the Keimyung Institute for International Studies and Korea Foundation co-organized this workshop. The institute was founded in 1995 and has studied international and regional relations and developed various programs to discuss them. The Institute studies China, Japan, USA, Latin America, and Europe, and other various areas, and educate graduated and undergraduate college students and provide research results. As the president of the Institute, I'm very happy to organize this workshop with KF and do my best to provide better programs. This workshop consists of 3 sessions under the theme of 100-year journey to Korea in Daegu, Gyeongbuk areas. Until now, KF program was conducted in Seoul, but as you know, Korea has many regions, areas, and cities besides Seoul, so this workshop is a good opportunity for you to understand the Korea as a whole, focusing on the area so-called Daegu, Gyeongbuk. From now on, I will introduce the overall schedule of the workshop and lectures. The lectures will be provided on 7 p.m. to 8:30 on Friday and 10 a.m. to 11:30 on Saturday. Now, I will touch upon the lectures one by one. The first session, we will discuss the security issue, pop culture, cutting-edge technology, religions, and philosophy of Korea. In the first lecture, the topic is Inter-Korean Boundaries, Nakdong River Defense Line and Inter-Korean Military Boundary Line. Yoo Jae-sung, the Vice President of Korea Research Institute for National Strategy, was invited to deliver his lecture. The national security is the most important issue to Koreans. To many foreigners, Korea is regarded as the advanced country which achieved economic development. However, to be frank, Korea is exposed to security risks such as the Korean War. For a long time, the North and South Koreas have experienced ups and downs such as reconciliation and conflicts. But nowadays, the two Koreas make efforts to achieve reconciliation mood. However, the security issue may be the critical to global communities going beyond the Korean peninsula. In this lecture, Dr. Yoo Jae-sung will explain the background of the Korean War and analyze its global and domestic implications, and he will discuss the Korean security issue with you. Thanks to his lecture, you will understand the Korean security status exactly and learn the various relevant issues. For the second lecture, Kim Hak-sun, music critic, will be with you under the theme of pop music of Korea. The topic is Soul of Korea, Korean pop music to become K-pop. It is scheduled from 10 a.m. to 11:30 on September 25, Saturday. He's very famous music critic. K-pop is very famous globally. K-pop is not created out of nothing, but is based on Korean cultural and artistic traditions. He will introduce to you the background and history of K-pop. He also explains how Korean culture and lifestyle and various stories are expressed through K-pop, and how K-pop goes beyond Korea toward the world, and how Korean quintessence is able to touch the people in the world through K-pop. For the third lecture, we invited Lee Jin-seok, CEO of OPASM, to help you to understand the advanced technology of Korea. The topic is blockchain future infrastructure to read e-government, which will be explained 7 p.m. to 8:30 on October 1st, the Friday. Blockchain technology is developing and expanding very fast, influencing financial sectors such as fintech, transportation, trade, logistics network, and medical service. It has huge impacts on various sectors, so it's not exaggeration to say every sector is under the influence of blockchain. Especially, it is related to AI and the fourth industrial revolution. Korea is an IT powerhouse, showing off advanced cutting-edge technology. He will discuss with you how the blockchain technology will influence the future world. For the fourth lecture, we invited Choi Jun-sik, Honorary Professor, University of Yuhwa, who will explain the religions and philosophy in Korea. The topic is Korea religion, read by culture. It will be held from 10 a.m. to 11:30 on October 2nd, Saturday. Korean culture is correlated with the Korean religions. Especially Korean religions are various, encompassing Confucianism, Buddhism, Catholic, and Christianity. Religions have impact on culture and vice versa. Especially, many foreigners visit Korea to enjoy temple stay or have a tour Catholic Holy Lands in Korea, showing great interest in Korean religions. So you will experience such religions and understand them, and he will introduce various Korean religions and how they have influenced Korean culture. That's the first session. For the second session, we cover various topics too. In the first lecture of the second session, we will study the modernization of Korea. Banru Joshua John, professor of Keimyung University, was invited to deliver the lecture. He's not a Korean. As a foreigner, his opinions are more objective and different from Koreans in terms of the modernization of Korea. So it's very meaningful, I think. In this lecture, he will think of a modernization process of Korea. And the topic is the rise or return understanding modern Korean history, and it will be held from 7 p.m. to 8:30 on October 8th. As I mentioned before, Korea has experienced many difficulties. Especially Korea was the colony of Japan and lost its sovereignty, and Korea was independent in 1945 and then had the Korean War and finally achieved cultural and economic development, overcoming many difficulties. In this lecture, he will introduce important factors of Korean development. And especially, Daegu Gyeongbuk area in Korea was the core for economic development, including POSCO company and other textile industry companies. Several Korean enterprises studied in Daegu, Gyeongbuk area. So in this lecture, we will study the development history of Korea, focusing on Daegu, Gyeongbuk. In the second lecture, Tony Masanori, the professor of university, will deliver the lecture under the topic of Hangul and newly interpreted Korean traditional architecture. He is a Japanese. As a foreigner, he will share his ideas on Korean architecture from the foreigner's perspective. And Korean architecture is very unique, and his opinions are more objective. Each country has a unique architecture and building styles. Your countries have your own architecture and styles. And Oriental architecture is different from Western architectures. Even in Asia, each country has a different style of architecture. Architecture also reflects the culture. He will introduce the characteristics of Korean buildings and how they have influenced on culture and vice versa. So thanks to him, you will understand the characteristics of Korean architecture. In the third lecture, Yoo Jong-il, director of KDI School, was invited to make a lecture. The topic is Moments of Decision for the Fate of the Korean Economy, will be held from 7 p.m. to 8:30 on October 22. As I mentioned before, Korea has experienced many difficulties and hardships to achieve economic development. He will explain how Koreans have overcome such hardships and decided policies and achieve a national consensus. It's very interesting topics. Korea achieved economic development really very fast. To this end, Koreans had tensions to make a consensus on infrastructure constructions, including Seoul-Busan Railway, and many development policies were required to develop regional development, including Daegu, Gyeongbuk. Many companies in Daegu, Gyeongbuk, such as Fosco, have had ups and downs to become the global companies, and finally being the pillar of Korean development. So he introduced the many difficulties and how to decide to overcome those difficulties. In the fourth lecture, Song Hyung-seok, professor of Keimyung University, was invited to make a lecture on the Taekwondo and soft power of Korea. And Taekwondo is a symbol of Korea, and it's a tradition of Korea, and now it's a global sport. Taekwondo functions as a vehicle to let people know Korea as a foreign policy. So thanks to Taekwondo, Korean culture was known by the people. So that's why Taekwondo is called as the sport of Korea. So the Taekwondo expresses the culture of Korea. So if you see the Taekwondo demonstrations show and understand on the development of the Taekwondo and its history, you will understand the Korean culture better. So it's a very interesting topic. And it will be held from 7 p.m. to 8:30 on October 29th. That's the second session. Now I'd like to introduce the third session with the 4 lectures. First lecture of the third session is about the Hangul and Korean language. I said you have a lot of interest in Hangul and Korean language. Robert Hwang, former professor of University of Seoul, was invited to make a presentation on Hangul, the alphabet, Korea's insanely great writing system. So he's a foreigner, so I think that his lecture is more meaningful and helpful to you than Korean lecturers. Hangul, for the beginners, Hangul appears to be difficult to learn. However, actually, Hangul is easy to learn, and especially many foreign scholars say that Korea Hangul is a very wonderful and systematic alphabet. So in this lecture, he will introduce the scientific system and beautiful alphabet of the Hangul. So it's a very interesting lecture, I think. In the second lecture, we will talk about the fourth industry of Korea. So the topic is the fourth industrial revolution and Korea's future industry. The lecture will be provided from 10 a.m. to 11:30 on October 16. Professor Kim Bun-jun, Park Se-jin, and Yalu, professors of Keimyung University, will deliver the lecture on how fourth industry has been developed in Korea. As you know well, Korea is an IT powerhouse. So in this lecture, we will learn how the fourth industry is developing, and as a leader country, Korea is leading this fourth industrial revolution. And what kind of the industries will be important in the future, and what kind of industry we have to focus on. And those kind of the contents we will study in this lecture, and we will learn the new technologies and new industries which are promising in the future. And the next lecture, we invited Bokhaeja craftsman cook of Korean food, who will talk about the food culture of Korea. The topic is Korean food culture and storytelling. And she will introduce the background and history of the Korean food development and how Korean food has been developed by reflecting the lifestyles of ancient Koreans. So in a nutshell, she will introduce the food culture. And actually, food has many relation with many areas, and the food is related to the stories. So I think that you have a lot of interest in Korean food, including 삼겹살, 김치찌개, 불고기, and 갈비, and those foods are very famous. And she will share very interesting stories of those food. And the lecture will be provided from 10 a.m. to 11:30 on October 23. In the last lecture, we invited Jo Hyun-jun, professor of Keimyung University, to talk about media and society of Korea. The topic is Korean society through Parasite, produced by director Bong Joon-ho, and it will be held from 10 a.m. to 11:30 on October 30th. Did you watch the movie? If you didn't, please watch the movie called Parasite before you attend this lecture. And the movie showed the real story of the people living in Korea. Korea achieved economic development and Korea culture is quite famous. However, there are many social tensions and conflicts between social classes. For example, the difference between haves and have-nots, and conflicts between social classes. So the Parasites is regarded as a kind of the black comedy, and the Parasite has excellent reputations from the world. So the movie got the prizes in Academy and other movie awards. So the Parasites show the behind story of the modern society of Korea, showing the conflicts and tension between social classes. And also many people think that Korea is an advanced country. However, there are very many sad stories and very many difficult stories and different stories in Korean society. So I think that if you watch this movie, you will understand the Korea as a whole. So he will introduce the Korean society through this movie. So those, as I mentioned before, we have 3 sessions with 4 lectures. So you are allowed to choose the session and the lectures that you want to participate in. And also, you are allowed to participate in every sessions and every lectures. So now I'll introduce Public Diplomacy Week. It's organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Korea Foundation to increase the awareness of people on public diplomacy. It's been held every year. Experts at the front line of public diplomacy will share their stories to solve many risks and grab opportunities. So it's a very meaningful time for you to become civilian diplomat. The participants in KF Workshop are allowed to join this event to share information on the roles of civilian diplomats. The theme of the session is, as a civilian diplomat, how to promote exchanges and cooperation between Korea and the participant countries. Bruno Pireora Fischer, Mexican ambassador to ROK, will moderate the session. Now I will introduce the schedule of the field trips. You will learn many contents through lectures, and you will experience them through field trips. However, unfortunately, because of COVID-19, I'm not sure if we proceed with the field trips as scheduled. However, we do our best. We plan to conduct individual field trips according to sessions on September to November under the theme of becoming a civilian diplomat. I ask you to find the common things between Korea and your own country and produce the advertisement materials to introduce Korea to the people in your country as a civilian diplomat. We plan to hold presentation events in the session of Public Diplomacy Week in October and in the last week of November, respectively. You are allowed to choose the date that you want. Some financial supports are provided for you to produce the materials to introduce Korea. For presentation, any format is possible, such as booklet, video, and others, and a small prize will be given to the best presenter. As for field trip, because of COVID-19, it may not be possible for you to make a group trip. However, I think activities of a small group, less than maybe 5 people, are allowed, so we'll provide programs for small groups such as temple stay. Last but not least, Its completion ceremony of KF Korea Workshop will be held in real time via Zoom. All students will participate. As a follow-up program to the 2021 Korea Workshop, the body program for establishing a network for trainee alumni association will be provided to help you to build friendship networks for continuous exchanges. Through such programs, you will understand Korea more and play more as a civilian diplomat. I think the programs are well organized, so I hope you actively participate in the programs to build the bridges between Korea and your own country. Once again, I really welcome you and thank you, and I hope you have more interest in this program and actively participate. Thank you.